48, the ancient powder that kills any bug. And why pest control companies pretend it doesn't exist. It is just after 9 on a humid August night, and you see them again. A thin black thread of sugar ants, single file, marching from the corner of the baseboard towards something invisible under the stove. You have wiped that floor twice today. The refrigerator hums. The clock above the sink ticks. And on the highest shelf of the cabinet over the fridge, behind the cracked vinegar jug, there is a battered tin can with no label. Inside that can is a powder older than this country, soft as flour, the color of bone. 5 pounds of it costs less than a tank of gas, and by tomorrow morning the ants will be gone. Not chased off, gone. Your grandfather knew what was in that can. The man who quoted your neighbor $340 last Tuesday knows too. He just isn't going to say it. Before we open that can, pull your chair a little closer. If you would rather learn the things your grandfather knew than be sold the same problem 4 times a year, leave a single word in the comments. Just say porch. That's how I'll know you're here, sitting on the same side of the table. And if any of this lands the way it ought to, stay subscribed. Not for the algorithm. For the slow, steady work of remembering what we already paid for and forgot. The first time I saw that can opened, I was maybe 9 years old. My grandfather kept it on the shelf above the icebox in a kitchen that smelled like coffee grounds and pine soap. He didn't say much when he reached for it. He pulled a wooden chair across the linoleum, climbed up slow on a bad knee, and brought it down with both hands like it weighed more than it did. He set it on the counter, pried the lid, and inside was nothing but a soft, pale dust that looked like the flour my grandmother kept in the bin by the stove. He tapped a little out along the baseboard with the back of a spoon. Then he closed the can. He did not explain. That generation rarely did. He put the can back on the shelf, washed his hands at the sink, and went out to the porch to listen to the radio. I remember staring at the line of ants that had been there an hour before, expecting them to scatter, to twitch, to do something. They didn't. They just kept walking through the dust like nothing had changed. I went to bed thinking the powder hadn't worked. I was wrong. By the time the sun came up over the hayfield, the line was gone, not thinned. Gone. No bodies, no smell, nothing. You have probably never seen something work that quietly. The sprays we buy now hiss and burn the back of your throat and leave a slick film on the cabinets for a week. They come with a warning label longer than the ingredients. They cost $12, $15, $20 a can, and you go through 2 cans a season. And the ants come back anyway, because the ants always come back. You know they come back. You have lived in your house long enough to know. So has the company that sold you the spray. So has the man in the white truck who runs a route through your subdivision every 90 days, clipboard in hand, smile on his face, $300 on his invoice. I am not here to call that man a crook. Most of those technicians are decent working men trying to feed a family the same as you and me. The trouble is not the man. The trouble is the shape of the business he works for. A business built on a recurring contract cannot, by its own nature, sell you a one-time fix. A business that bills you every quarter cannot afford to mention the 5-pound bag at the feed store that would end the visits altogether. It isn't a conspiracy, it's arithmetic. And arithmetic, plain as it is, has emptied more wallets in this country than any conspiracy ever did. So the can stays a secret without anyone ever needing to whisper. Nobody hides it. Nobody bans it. It sits on the shelf at the farm co-op, 20 minutes from your house, between the chick feed and the fly tape, with a price tag in the neighborhood of $18. A man stocks it on Tuesdays, a woman rings it up on Saturdays, and in between, 10,000 homeowners in your county write checks to companies that will never, not once, say its name out loud. You have to know to ask, and you only know to ask if somebody told you. Most of the people who could have told you are buried now in cemeteries behind small white churches, beside their husbands and their fathers. That is the part that started to bother me sometime in my 40s. Not the money, though the money is real. Not the bugs, though the bugs are a nuisance. It was the forgetting. The way a whole country of grown people had, inside of about 2 generations, lost the habit of solving its own small problems. We used to handle ants with what was in the can on the shelf. We used to handle a wasp nest with a bucket and a long stick at dusk. We used to handle most of what bit us or chewed us or crawled across our counters with our own 2 hands and about $1 worth of common sense. Now, the average suburban home has the number for a pest control company on the refrigerator and not a single jar of anything useful in the cupboard. That is not the homeowner's fault. He was sold a story, the same story all of us were sold, that the modern way is the safer way, and the cheaper way, and the smarter way. Sometimes it is, a lot of times it isn't. And in the case of the can on the high shelf, the modern way is just an old way with a markup, repackaged, rebranded, and resold to you every 90 days for the rest of your natural life. The powder hasn't changed, the price has. Tonight, I am going to tell you what is in that can. I am going to tell you exactly where it comes from, and how it was used 100 years before any of us were born, and why the bug that crawls through it tonight will be dead by Thursday without a single drop of poison touching the wood of your floor. I am going to show you what it looks like up close, under glass, where the real story lives, because once you see that, you will never look at a can of hardware store spray the same way again. And I am going to give you the one honest reason it isn't the first thing every exterminator in America mentions when your phone rings. There is a reason. It is a quieter reason than the channels with the loud thumbnails want it to be. But it is the true one. And the true one is usually enough. Sit with the numbers for a minute, because the numbers are where the fog lifts. A standard quarterly pest contract in most of the country runs somewhere between $90 and $140 a visit, 4 visits a year. That is $400 to better than $500 before anyone has knocked on a wasp nest or crawled under your porch. Add a one-time ant call at $250. Add a roach treatment at $350. Add a termite inspection that turns into a termite bond at $1,200. A working family can spend $2,000 in a single calendar year on a problem the can on the shelf would have handled for 18. I want to be careful here because resentment is a cheap drug, and I am not in the business of selling it. The technicians who run those routes are mostly good men. They drive long days, climb into crawl spaces full of black widows, and come home smelling like chemicals their own wives won't let in the laundry room. The trouble is not them. The trouble is the math of the company they work for. A company that bills you every 90 days has to find something to do every 90 days. A company that sells you a one-time bag of powder for $18 only sees you once. One of those models builds a quarterly route. The other one builds a man who doesn't need the route. That is the whole secret. And it isn't a secret at all. It is just a structure. The same structure runs through your cable bill, your lawn service, your water softener rental, your furnace contract, and about half of small charges that bleed a fixed income dry between the 1st of the month and the 15th. You were not robbed. You were enrolled, and enrollment, once you sign it, has a way of feeling like the natural order of things until somebody pulls a battered tin can off a high shelf and reminds you that the natural order used to look a lot different. So let me open the can. The powder is called diatomaceous earth. Say it slow if it's the first time you've heard it. Diatomaceous earth. Some old farm catalogs called it fossil flour, because that is almost exactly what it is. You want the kind labeled food grade. Write that down if you have a pencil near the chair. Food grade, not pool grade. We will come back to that distinction, because it matters, and because the wrong bag from the wrong shelf will give you a headache and a sore throat for no reason at all. What is actually in the bag is older than anything in your house, older than your house, older than your county. Many millions of years ago, freshwater lakes across what is now the American West were full of microscopic single-celled organisms called diatoms. They had tiny shells made of silica, which is the same stuff in window glass and beach sand, only arranged into shapes you would not believe until you saw them. The lakes dried up. The diatoms didn't. Their shells settled into thick, chalky beds hundreds of feet deep in places and waited. Men in Nevada and Oregon mine those beds now with bulldozers and screens. They grind the chalk fine, bag it, and ship it to the feed store down the road from you. That is the whole supply chain. No factory, no patent. No molecule a chemist invented in 1974. There is a quiet kind of pride in knowing that. Long before any of us were born, an old grain farmer with a wooden scoop and a burlap sack would dust the corn in his crib with this same powder before the first frost. Tradition holds that farmers used it on stored grain for well over a century, long before the bug sprays we grew up with were ever in a hardware store. He didn't know the science. He knew the result. He knew the weevils that ruined his father's crib didn't ruin his. He knew the rats that came for the grain left empty because the bugs they came hunting were already dried up in the seams of the wood. He passed the scoop to his son. His son, somewhere along the way, stopped using it. The barn got torn down. The The scoop went to an estate sale. The grandson called an exterminator. You have probably stood 3 feet from this powder a dozen times in your life and never known what it was. If you have ever owned a pool, the bag of white filter media in the pump house is the same mineral, processed differently. If you have ever flipped over a bag of chicken feed and seen anti-caking agent listed in small print, that is often this powder used to keep the feed from clumping in humid weather. It is sold for cleaning oil spills off concrete. It is sold for polishing silver. It is sold under a dozen names in a dozen aisles, and almost none of those bags will mention on the front of the label the one quiet thing it does best, which is end most of the bug trouble in ordinary American house. Now, here's the hedge I owe you, because I am not going to send you out of this kitchen with half the truth. The pool-grade version of this powder is heat-treated for filtration, and that process changes the silica into a form that is genuinely not safe to breathe and not safe to keep around your counters. Food grade is the one you want, in the brown paper bag from the feed store or the co-op, marked plainly. A dust mask while you apply it is plain common sense, the same mask you would wear to sand a board. Used right, on the floor and not in your lungs, it is about as gentle a thing as you can put in a house. Used wrong, out of the wrong bag, it will remind you that nothing on this earth is foolish-proof. So now you know its name, you know where it comes from, you know which bag to buy. What you still don't know is how a powder soft enough to sift through a flour sieve takes down a roach that can shrug off a direct hit of hardware store spray. The answer is not chemistry, the answer is shape. And once you see the shape, you will understand why the bug that walks through this dust tonight has, in a sense, already lost a fight that started 10 million years ago in the bottom of a lake. Put a pinch of this powder under a good microscope, and you will not believe what you are looking at. It does not look like dust at all. It looks like a junkyard of broken glass. Tiny tubes, tiny stars, tiny sawtooth cylinders, jagged at every edge, sharper than any knife you own. Some of them look like little snowflakes carved out of razors. Some look like spools of wire wrapped in teeth. That is the skeleton of a diatom, magnified 1,000 times. Soft as flour to your finger, soft as flour to your skin. To a bug the size of a sesame seed, it is a field of swords. That is the whole mechanism, and it is the part that should make a grown man set down his coffee. A roach walks across the dust. The microscopic edges score his waxy outer shell in 100 places. The wax is what holds the moisture inside him. The moisture is what keeps him alive. Within hours, sometimes within a day or two, he dries out from the inside. He doesn't twitch. He doesn't foam. He doesn't crawl off to die behind your wall and smell for a week. He just stops. The same thing happens to ants, to fleas, to bed bugs, to silverfish, to the earwigs that come up out of the mulch in July. The shape does the work, not the chemistry, the shape. This is the part the spray industry would rather you not sit with too long because it changes what you understand about the fight. Every chemical pesticide on a shelf has a clock on it. Bugs breed fast. The ones the spray doesn't kill breed. The ones their babies make are a little tougher than the ones before. Inside of 10 years, the spray that worked in 1995 is half as strong against the same roach in 2005, and the company that sold it to you is already mixing the next one. A bug cannot, however, evolve a resistance to being physically cut. There is no genetic mutation that grows armor against geometry. A roach in your kitchen tonight dies the same way a roach in a Kansas grain crib died in 1926. The powder does not have a clock. That is why it has lasted. That is also why it has, very quietly, been left out of the conversation. Now let me put it to work in your house, because knowing is half a thing and doing is the other half. You want a thin film, not a snowdrift. The mistake almost every new homeowner makes the first time is dumping a pile of it like flour on a cutting board. A pile, a bug walks around. A film, a bug walks through. A cheap plastic puffer bottle from the feed store costs about $4 and works 10 times better than your hand. An empty Parmesan cheese shaker, washed and dried, works just as well. Tap it lightly. You want to be able to see the wood grain through the dust. If you can't, you use too much. Run a thin line along your baseboards, especially in the kitchen and the bathroom. Get behind the refrigerator and behind the stove, where the warm motors live and the crumbs collect. Lift the lid on the cabinet under the sink and dust the back corners where the pipes come through the wall. That is the highway every bug in your house uses to come and go. Outside, run a band along the foundation line where the siding meets the dirt. Get into the cracks of the porch boards. At dusk, when a paper wasp nest goes quiet, a careful man with a long-handled puffer can put an end to it without a single drop of spray. Many homesteaders work a small amount into a dog's bedding for fleas, using food grade only and a light hand, and a real flea problem on a real animal still belongs in front of a vet, not a YouTube video. Here is the honest hedge, because I respect you too much to leave it out. This powder is not instant. It will not knock a hornet out of the air the way a foaming can will. It will not satisfy the part of a man that wants to see the bug die in front of him. It works in the dark while you sleep over the course of a few days. It also stops working when it gets wet and starts working again when it dries. That means it is not a one-time job in a damp basement, and it is not a single pass treatment after a heavy rain on the foundation. It is a patient method. The old men who used it were patient men. The world they lived in rewarded that. Ours does not, which is part of why the powder got forgotten. And the cost, since cost is what put you in this chair in the first place. A 5-pound bag of food-grade diatomaceous earth at any feed store or farm co-op I have walked into in the last 10 years runs roughly $15 to $25 depending on where you live. That bag, used the way I just described, will handle most of the bug trouble in an ordinary house for 2 to 3 full seasons. Compare that, plain as daylight, to one quarterly service call. Compare it to the spray cans you have already thrown in the trash this year. Compare it to the contract on your refrigerator. The math is not close. It has never been close. The only thing standing between you and the math is the habit of picking up the phone. So go put the can back on the shelf for a minute, because the powder isn't really what this was about. This was about the slow, quiet realization that a great many of the troubles we have been taught to hire out were once solved, cheaply and well, by people who had fewer dollars and more sense than the rest of us. It was about the small confidence of a man or a woman who can handle their own house. That confidence is worth more than the $18 you'll save. It is the thing your grandfather had in his hands when he climbed down off that chair and went out to the porch without explaining a word of it. I would like you to have it back. Tell me in the comments what your mother or your grandfather or the old neighbor down the road used for pests before the spray trucks came around. One memory, one sentence. I read them, and so do the people sitting in chairs like yours all over this country, and there is more real knowledge in that comment section than in any book I have ever paid for. If the old way suits you better than the sold way, stay close to this porch. We sit out here most evenings and there's always room. Next time, I want to show you the half cup of one common kitchen staple sitting in your pantry right now that pulls rust off a cast iron skillet without a wire wheel and without a $30 bottle from the hardware aisle. Bring the skillet. We'll do it together.